What happens when one of Hollywood's calmest and most admired stars walks onto the set of the most unpredictable daytime talk show on television and suddenly refuses to stay quiet? Before we dive into this unbelievable moment, make sure to subscribe to the Echo View, hit that like button, and drop a comment below, because today's story takes a turn nobody in that studio was ready for. The lights inside the studio glowed with that familiar polished warmth audiences had seen for decades. The giant screens flashed bright graphics. Producers rushed quietly behind cameras. Audience members whispered excitedly while waiting for the segment everyone had been talking about all week. Zendaya was finally appearing live on The View. The applause erupted the second her name echoed through the studio speakers. She walked out with grace, so effortless it almost looked unreal. Calm smile, elegant posture, soft confidence. She waved at the audience while the host stood to greet her. Even Joy Behar, known for her sharp tongue and unpredictable comments, smiled wider than usual. At first, everything felt normal. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed her warmly. Sunny Hostin praised her recent success. Sarah Haynes complimented her latest red carpet appearance. Alyssa Farah Griffin joked about how the internet practically shuts down whenever Zendaya posts a photo online. The audience laughed. Zendaya smiled politely and thanked them. But Joy sat quietly. Not silent in a peaceful way. Silent in the way someone gets when they're preparing to say something they know will land hard. And somewhere behind the cameras, producers were already sensing it. "You've become this generation's perfect celebrity," Joy finally said, leaning back in her chair. "Every interview, every appearance, always careful. Always polished." The crowd chuckled lightly, unsure if it was a compliment. Zendaya smiled carefully. "I just try to be myself." Joy tilted her head. "But are you?" The room shifted instantly. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for everyone to feel it. Even the audience laughter faded quicker than normal. Zendaya's smile paused for half a second. Whoopi noticed it immediately. "Well, that got serious fast," Whoopi joked, trying to soften the tension. But Joy kept going. "You know what I mean," Joy continued. "Hollywood today loves celebrities who never take risks. Nobody says the wrong thing anymore. Everyone's media trained." Sunny glanced toward Joy carefully. Sarah looked down at her notes. Zendaya crossed one leg slowly, maintaining composure. "I think being thoughtful before speaking isn't necessarily a bad thing." Applause came from parts of the audience. Joy smiled thinly. "Thoughtful or calculated?" A louder reaction this time. Several audience members exchanged looks. And suddenly the interview no longer felt like a celebrity appearance. It felt like a challenge. Zendaya inhaled slowly. You could almost see the shift happen inside her. The calmness stayed on her face, but something sharpened behind her eyes. "I don't think protecting your peace means you're fake," she answered gently. Joy leaned forward immediately. "But celebrities today build brands around being relatable. Isn't that exhausting? Constantly trying to appear perfect." Zendaya blinked once. "Who said I'm trying to appear perfect?" That line hit harder than expected. A few audience members clapped instantly. Joy laughed softly, but there was tension behind it now. "Oh, come on," Joy replied. "You know exactly what image Hollywood sells with you." The room became uncomfortably quiet. Whoopi shifted in her seat. Even the producers backstage were beginning to move around more urgently now, whispering into headsets. Because this wasn't playful anymore. This was becoming personal. Zendaya remained calm, but the warmth in her expression slowly disappeared. "You're talking about me like I'm a product," she said quietly. Joy shrugged. "Well, aren't all celebrities products to some extent?" A few gasps slipped out across the audience. Sunny immediately jumped in. "I think there's a difference between public image and reducing someone to branding." But Joy wasn't letting go. "I'm asking a fair question," she insisted. "People see Zendaya as untouchable. Always elegant. Always poised. Never messy. Is that real or rehearsed?" The tension exploded silently across the stage. Because now everyone understood what was happening. Joy Behar was trying to crack Zendaya's image live on television. And for the first time all interview, Zendaya stopped smiling completely. She sat straighter. The studio lights reflected in her eyes as she looked directly at Joy. And suddenly her voice carried a firmness nobody expected. "You know what's interesting?" she asked. The audience went still. Joy folded her arms. Zendaya continued carefully. "People always say women should speak up more. Be confident. Be strong. But the second a woman learns how to carry herself calmly, suddenly she's calculated. The audience erupted into applause. Loud applause. Not polite clapping. Real applause. Joy tried to respond, but Zendaya kept speaking. And especially for young women in this industry, Zendaya added, we're criticized no matter what. If we're emotional, we're dramatic. If we're careful, we're fake. If we protect ourselves, we're cold. Now even Whoopi nodded slowly. The energy in the room completely changed. Because nobody expected Zendaya to push back this directly. Joy's smile faded slightly. Well, I'm just saying authenticity matters. Zendaya looked directly at her. So does respect. The audience exploded again. A louder reaction than before. Some people actually stood up clapping. And suddenly producers backstage were panicking. Because clips of this moment were already spreading online before the interview had even finished airing. One producer whispered frantically, Twitter's blowing up right now. Another muttered, this is becoming a disaster. But on stage, neither woman backed down. Joy adjusted her papers. You think I'm disrespecting you? Zendaya didn't answer immediately. That silence somehow felt louder than shouting. Finally, she spoke softly. I think sometimes older generations confuse vulnerability with entertainment. The crowd reacted instantly. Oh, several audience members covered their mouths. Sunny looked stunned. Sarah's eyes widened. Even Whoopi leaned back slowly, like she knew the interview had officially crossed a line no one could uncross. Joy laughed sharply. So now this is generational. Zendaya stayed calm. No, it's human. The room went dead quiet again. And for the first time all segment, Joy looked genuinely caught off guard. Because Zendaya wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't angry. That was the unsettling part. She was controlled. Focused. Precise. Every word landed cleanly. You asked if I'm rehearsed, Zendaya continued. But maybe what makes people uncomfortable is seeing someone who learned how to survive public scrutiny without falling apart publicly. Silence. Pure silence. The audience didn't even clap right away because they were still processing it. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Whoopi suddenly stepped in. All right, Whoopi interrupted carefully. I think we all need to breathe for a second. Nervous laughter spread across the audience. But the tension didn't leave. It stayed hanging in the air like smoke. Because everyone knew this interview had become something much bigger than celebrity gossip. It was now a collision between two completely different worlds. One built on confrontation. The other built on control. And neither side intended to surrender. As the cameras briefly cut toward commercial graphics, producers rushed toward the stage from every direction. Hosts leaned toward each other whispering urgently. Audience members pulled out phones immediately. And Zendaya sat quietly in her chair, expression unreadable. But Joy Behar was still staring at her. Still preparing her next move. Because the confrontation was far from over. The second the show slipped into commercial break, the studio transformed completely. Stage managers hurried across the floor whispering into headsets. Producers gathered near the cameras with panicked expressions. Audience members leaned toward each other, replaying every line they had just heard like witnesses after an accident. Did she really just say that to Joy? No way this stays calm after the break. Zendaya's not backing down. Even backstage staff looked stunned. Because this wasn't the kind of tense television audiences usually saw on daytime talk shows. This felt different. Sharper. More personal. Like two completely different generations had collided live on air, and neither one realized how explosive it would become. At the table, Whoopi leaned toward Joy first. Take it down a notch, she muttered quietly. Joy adjusted her microphone with visible irritation. I'm asking questions. That's my job. And it's becoming a fight, Sunny whispered. Meanwhile, Zendaya sat calmly in her chair, while a makeup artist approached to touch up her face. But even from a distance, the atmosphere around her felt colder now. Focused. Her team stood near the edge of the stage watching carefully. One of her publicists quietly asked, Do you want us to pull you after this segment? Zendaya shook her head immediately. No. The answer came fast. Too fast. Because now it wasn't just about surviving the interview anymore. Now it felt personal to her too. The countdown for live return began. 10 seconds. Audience members quickly straightened in their seats. The bright studio music returned. Applause signs flashed again. And suddenly the cameras were live. Whoopi immediately tried to reset the mood. We're back with the incredibly talented Zendaya, she announced warmly. And clearly we've got a passionate conversation happening today. Nervous laughter spread across the audience. Zendaya smiled politely again, but the softness from earlier was gone now. Joy jumped back and almost immediately. Joy began, I actually think these conversations matter because celebrity culture affects young people deeply. Zendaya nodded once. I agree. But, Joy continued, there's pressure now for celebrities to present themselves as morally flawless all the time. Sunny sighed quietly under her breath. Here we go again. Zendaya kept her composure. I don't think accountability and perfection are the same thing. But audiences don't allow mistakes anymore, Joy fired back. Especially online. Zendaya leaned slightly forward. Respectfully, she replied, I think audiences are just tired of arrogance. A loud reaction burst from the crowd. Joy blinked. That one landed harder than expected. And I think people respond when public figures show humility, Zendaya added carefully. Joy crossed her arms. So now celebrities are role models again? No, Zendaya answered instantly. But we're human beings. That should matter. The audience applauded again. Whoopi looked between them cautiously, like someone watching a storm getting closer. Then Joy suddenly smiled. But it wasn't friendly. You really know how to say the right thing every time. The temperature in the room dropped instantly, because everyone understood the implication. Again, calculated, manufactured, rehearsed. Zendaya looked at her for a long moment. Then finally she spoke. You keep saying that like composure is dishonest. Dead silence. Joy tilted her head slightly. Sometimes it is. Sunny jumped in quickly. Or maybe it's emotional discipline. Joy waved her off. No, I'm serious. People connect with flaws. Messiness. Real emotions. Zendaya nodded slowly. You think calm people don't feel real emotions? Another wave of applause hit the studio. The audience was fully engaged now. Some people were openly taking sides. And online, clips from the interview were spreading at terrifying speed. Backstage, one producer stared at a phone screen in disbelief. Oh my God, he whispered. Hashtag Zendaya on The View is #1 already. Another producer muttered. This is turning into a cultural debate. Back on stage, Joy leaned forward again. Here's my concern, she said. Young women watching this think they have to appear composed every second to be respected. Zendaya's eyes narrowed slightly. And maybe young women are exhausted from being punished every time they aren't. The audience exploded. Whoopi leaned back slowly. Sunny actually smiled. Sarah covered her mouth briefly. Joy looked irritated now. Real irritation. Not television banter anymore. Well, nobody's punishing you, Joy replied sharply. Zendaya finally stopped holding back. No, she asked softly. That single word froze the room, because the emotion underneath it suddenly became visible. Not anger. Pain. Controlled pain. Zendaya folded her hands together carefully before continuing. You know what's interesting about women in this industry? She said quietly. People praise us when we're graceful, but only until that grace stops entertaining them. The audience became silent again. Every camera in the studio seemed locked onto her face now. And then suddenly, Zendaya continued, they want cracks. They want breakdowns. They want mistakes. Because vulnerability became content. Nobody interrupted her this time. Not even Joy. You asked if I'm too polished, Zendaya said. But maybe I just learned early that the world is less forgiving to some of us. A heavy silence filled the studio. Whoopi looked down at the table briefly. Sunny's expression softened. Even parts of the audience looked emotional now. Joy exhaled sharply before responding. You think I'm attacking you because you're successful? Zendaya shook her head calmly. No. I think you're frustrated that my generation communicates differently. The audience reacted immediately. Joy laughed incredulously. Oh, please. No, really, Zendaya continued. Older media thrived on catching celebrities falling apart. My generation grew up watching that happen. The room got quieter with every sentence. And a lot of us decided we didn't want to give the world those pieces of ourselves anymore. That line hit like a hammer. Because suddenly the conversation wasn't about Zendaya alone anymore. It became about fame itself. The internet. Public humiliation. Mental health. Celebrity culture. Everything. Joy stared at her for several seconds without speaking. Then finally she said, So now interviewers are the villains? Zendaya answered immediately. No, but there's a difference between asking hard questions and trying to provoke people. Gasps spread across the audience. Whoopi closed her eyes briefly, like she could already imagine tomorrow's headlines. Joy Behar accused of provoking Zendaya live on air. Backstage, producers were practically melting down. We need to cut this segment shorter. No way. Ratings are exploding. This could become a PR nightmare. But nobody could stop it now. The interview had completely taken on a life of its own. Joy leaned back slowly. You really think that's what I'm doing? Zendaya looked directly at her. And for the first time all interview, her voice carried visible emotion. I think sometimes people become so used to confrontation that they forget there's an actual person sitting across from them. The audience erupted into applause so loud it nearly drowned out the microphones. Several people stood up. Sunny nodded immediately. Sarah clapped too. Even Whoopi joined the applause briefly. Joy noticed, and her expression hardened, because for the first time during the entire exchange, the audience was no longer divided. They were overwhelmingly on Zendaya's side. The energy shifted completely, and Joy knew it. But instead of backing away, she doubled down. So what? Joy snapped. Now I'm the bully? A collective gasp swept across the studio. Zendaya paused, then answered quietly. I didn't say that. But you implied it. No, Zendaya replied calmly. I described how this feels. That response somehow hit even harder. Because it wasn't aggressive. It was honest. Painfully honest. And suddenly the audience wasn't watching a celebrity defend her image anymore. They were watching someone defend her humanity. The room fell completely silent. Then from somewhere in the audience, a woman suddenly shouted, Leave her alone. The crowd burst into applause again. Producers rushed nervously near the audience section, trying to calm things down. Whoopi quickly stepped in. All right, let's keep it respectful, everybody. But the atmosphere had already changed beyond repair. Joy sat rigidly in her chair. Zendaya remained composed. And millions of viewers watching at home could feel it. This interview was no longer entertainment. It had become a public reckoning. And somehow, the most explosive moment still hadn't even happened yet. The tension inside the studio no longer felt like daytime television. It felt like standing inside a pressure cooker moments before it burst. Nobody in the audience was whispering anymore. Nobody checked their phones. Even the camera operators moved more carefully now, sensing every second could become another viral moment. Zendaya sat perfectly still at the table, but her composure now carried weight behind it. Not softness, not nervousness, strength. Joy Behar adjusted the stack of cards in front of her, though it was obvious she wasn't reading them anymore. Her focus stayed locked on Zendaya. And for the first time since the interview began, Whoopi Goldberg looked genuinely concerned. Not about ratings, about where this conversation was heading. We're discussing celebrity culture, Whoopi said carefully, trying once again to stabilize the room. And clearly people have strong feelings about it. Because it matters, Joy interrupted immediately. The audience groaned softly. Not loudly enough to be disrespectful, but enough for everyone to hear it. Joy noticed, and that only seemed to irritate her more. No, seriously, Joy continued. People worship celebrities now. Every word becomes sacred online. And if someone asks a difficult question, suddenly they're toxic. Zendaya's expression didn't move, but the audience reaction did. Some nodded at Joy's point. Others crossed their arms. The room had become emotionally divided again. And somehow that made the atmosphere even more dangerous. Zendaya finally spoke. I don't think difficult questions are the problem. Joy answered immediately. Then what is? Zendaya looked directly at her. The intention behind them. The audience erupted again. Whoopi leaned back slowly. Sunny glanced toward the producers behind the cameras. Even Sarah looked stunned by how direct this had become. Joy laughed sharply. You think my intention is bad? Zendaya hesitated. That hesitation alone changed everything. Because it suggested she didn't fully know how honest she wanted to be on live television. The audience leaned in collectively. Then Zendaya finally answered. I think sometimes people stop seeing celebrities as human beings. A quieter reaction spread this time. Not explosive applause. Something heavier. More emotional. Joy shook her head. Oh, come on. You're one of the most protected celebrities in Hollywood. Zendaya blinked slowly. Protected. That word clearly hit something. You think fame protects people? She asked softly. Joy shrugged. It certainly gives advantages. Zendaya nodded once. It gives visibility, she corrected. The room fell silent again. And visibility without humanity can become very dangerous. Whoopi's face changed slightly at that sentence. Because suddenly this wasn't about media training anymore. Something deeper was coming. Zendaya folded her hands together carefully. When I was younger, she began quietly, I watched public figures get torn apart every single day online. Especially women. Nobody interrupted her. You'd see people laughing while someone was clearly hurting, clearly overwhelmed, clearly breaking down. The audience grew still. And eventually, Zendaya continued, my generation learned something. Joy crossed her arms again. What's that? That the internet rewards humiliation. Complete silence. Even backstage, producers stopped whispering. Because the mood had shifted completely now. This no longer felt like an argument between a celebrity and a talk show host. It felt personal. Real. Zendaya's voice stayed calm. But emotion had begun creeping underneath every sentence now. So yes, she said, some of us became more guarded. Some of us learned how to survive attention without bleeding publicly. The audience applauded loudly again. But this time the applause felt supportive rather than excited. Joy looked unconvinced. But there's a danger in becoming too guarded too, she argued. People stop knowing who you really are. Zendaya stared at the table briefly before looking back up. And maybe that's okay. That line stunned the room. Joy blinked. What? Maybe strangers don't deserve unlimited access to people, Zendaya said firmly. The audience exploded. Huge applause. Several people stood up immediately. Sunny nodded hard. That's true. Sarah clapped too. Whoopi stayed quiet, watching carefully. But Joy looked genuinely frustrated now. So celebrities should just hide behind PR walls forever? Zendaya exhaled slowly. No, she replied. But boundaries aren't dishonesty. That sentence hit like lightning. Because suddenly millions of viewers watching understood exactly why this conversation had become so emotional. Zendaya wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was defending the right to privacy in a culture obsessed with exposure. Joy leaned forward again. But fans connect through vulnerability. And exploitation disguises itself as connection all the time. Zendaya shot back instantly. The audience lost it. Gasps. Applause. Shouting. One man in the crowd actually stood and yelled, Tell her. Whoopi raised both hands quickly. Okay. But nobody could calm the energy now. Joy stared at Zendaya in disbelief. Because that was the first time Zendaya had truly fired back without cushioning the blow. And everyone felt it. The silence afterward became unbearable. Then Joy spoke carefully. You really think interviews like this are exploitation? Zendaya paused again. This time much longer. The cameras stayed close on her face. And suddenly, for the first time all interview, the confidence faded just enough for viewers to glimpse exhaustion underneath it. Not exhaustion from Joy specifically. Exhaustion from years of scrutiny. Years of cameras. Years of constantly being watched. I think, Zendaya began quietly, people underestimate what it feels like to constantly perform emotional accessibility. The room became completely still. No matter how tired you are. No matter what's happening in your life. No matter how overwhelmed you feel. Even Joy stopped interrupting now. People still expect smiles, Zendaya continued. They expect grace. They expect patience. And if you protect yourself emotionally, suddenly you're cold. The audience reaction softened again. Some people looked emotional now. Sunny's eyes narrowed sympathetically. Whoopi watched Zendaya with a different expression entirely now. Understanding. Because she had lived through fame too. Real fame. And she knew exactly what Zendaya meant. Joy finally responded more quietly than before. But audiences feel attached to celebrities because they grow up with them. Zendaya nodded gently. I understand that. Then why shut people out? Zendaya smiled sadly. Because sometimes the world mistakes access for ownership. That line detonated across the internet instantly. Backstage, a producer looked down at social media updates and whispered, Oh my God. Another producer grabbed the phone. She's trending globally now. The hashtags were multiplying by the second. Hashtag Zendaya versus Joy. Hashtag Leave Zendaya Alone. Hashtag The View. Hashtag Joy Behar. Hashtag Respect Zendaya. Millions of people were already choosing sides. Meanwhile on stage, the emotional balance had completely shifted. Joy no longer looked confident. She looked defensive. And Zendaya, somehow, looked stronger the calmer she became. That contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. Joy adjusted her microphone again before speaking carefully. People might watch this and think you're lecturing them. Zendaya nodded once. Maybe. And that doesn't concern you? Zendaya looked directly into the audience this time. No, she answered honestly. What concerns me is how normal it's become to demand emotional access to people we don't actually know. Silence. Pure silence. Then applause slowly began building again. Bigger. Louder. Longer. Until nearly the entire audience was clapping. Joy looked around the room and realized something uncomfortable. The crowd had completely turned. Whoopi finally stepped in again. I think what Zendaya's saying, she began carefully, is that fame doesn't erase humanity. Zendaya nodded gratefully. But Joy suddenly spoke again before the moment could settle. Fine, Joy said sharply. But if celebrities want privacy so badly, why stay famous? The room gasped. Even Sunny looked shocked she said it. Zendaya's expression froze. Not angry. Not offended. Just stunned. And for the first time during the entire interview, silence stretched too long. Because everyone knew that question crossed into dangerous territory. Whoopi immediately muttered, Joy. But it was too late. Zendaya slowly leaned back in her chair. Her eyes lowered briefly. And when she finally looked back up, the hurt in her expression was impossible to miss. You think people deserve mistreatment because they followed their dreams? She asked quietly. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Joy opened her mouth, but nothing came out immediately. Because suddenly the interview no longer looked like sharp television debate. It looked cruel, and everyone in the studio could feel it, including Joy herself. The silence after Zendaya's question felt almost unbearable. You think people deserve mistreatment because they followed their dreams? Nobody in the studio moved. The audience sat frozen in their seats. Even the producers backstage stopped speaking into their headsets for a moment, like the entire building had collectively forgotten how to breathe. Joy Behar stared across the table, clearly realizing too late how harsh her question had sounded once spoken out loud. Whoopi Goldberg immediately stepped in. All right, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. I think everybody needs to recalibrate here. But the damage had already been done, because the expression on Zendaya's face had changed completely. The polished calmness was still there, but now viewers could see something underneath it. Disappointment. Not theatrical disappointment. Real disappointment. The kind that comes from hearing someone reduce years of pressure and scrutiny into a single dismissive question. Joy finally tried to recover. That's not what I meant, she said quickly. I'm saying fame comes with public attention. Zendaya nodded slowly. I know. Her voice stayed soft. That somehow made the moment even heavier. I accepted attention, she continued quietly. I didn't accept losing my right to be treated like a human being. The audience erupted into applause so loud it nearly shook the studio. Several people stood immediately. Sunny Hostin clapped hard against the table. Sarah Haynes nodded while looking visibly emotional. Even Whoopi lowered her head briefly, like she knew the moment had officially gone beyond daytime television. Joy tried to speak again, but the crowd reaction swallowed her words. Backstage, producers stared at live analytics in disbelief. This is insane. Viewer numbers just jumped again. Every news outlet is clipping this right now. Social media had completely exploded. Celebrities were already posting reactions before the interview even ended. Some defended Joy's right to ask difficult questions. But far more people sided with Zendaya, especially younger audiences. Millions were reposting clips of her lines. Boundaries aren't dishonesty. The world mistakes access for ownership. I accepted attention. I didn't accept losing my humanity. Those sentences spread across the internet like wildfire. Meanwhile, inside the studio, the emotional atmosphere became almost surreal. Because something unexpected had happened during the confrontation. The audience stopped seeing Zendaya as a celebrity. They started seeing her as a person. And that changed everything. Whoopi leaned forward carefully. She said, looking between both women. This conversation actually says a lot about where culture is right now. Zendaya nodded respectfully. Joy remained silent. Whoopi continued. There's a real divide between generations when it comes to fame, privacy, and vulnerability. Sunny added softly. And maybe we all need to rethink what we expect from public figures emotionally. Joy finally exhaled and leaned back in her chair. For the first time all interview, her voice lost its sharpness. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she admitted. Zendaya looked at her calmly. I know. The audience quieted again. But intent and impact aren't always the same thing, Zendaya added gently. That line hit the room with a completely different kind of power. Not explosive. Not confrontational. Just painfully honest. Joy looked down at the table briefly. And suddenly the entire energy of the interview shifted again. The fight was gone now. In its place was discomfort, reflection, and maybe even regret. Because for the first time, Joy Behar looked unsure of herself. Not angry, not defensive, just aware. Aware that millions of people watching no longer saw this as clever television debate. They saw it as an example of how public figures are often pushed emotionally for entertainment. Whoopi slowly turned toward Zendaya. "You handled yourself with a lot of grace today," she said sincerely. Zendaya smiled faintly. "Thank you. But I imagine this gets exhausting." Zendaya laughed softly for the first time in nearly an hour. "Sometimes," she admitted. The audience laughed gently with her, the tension finally easing slightly. Then she said something nobody expected. "But honestly, I think everybody's tired." The room went quiet again. People online are tired. Celebrities are tired. Audiences are tired. Everybody feels constantly watched and judged now. Even Joy listened carefully this time. "And maybe," Zendaya continued, "we forgot how to talk to each other without trying to win." That sentence lingered in the air long after she finished speaking. Whoopi nodded slowly. Sunny looked emotional again. Sarah wiped at her eye discreetly. And somewhere backstage, a producer whispered, "That's the clip." Because everyone knew they had just witnessed the defining moment of the interview. Not the confrontation. Not the viral argument. That moment. The moment the conversation stopped being about celebrity culture and started becoming about humanity itself. As the segment finally came to an end, the applause inside the studio became overwhelming. Not chaotic applause. Not dramatic applause. Respectful applause. Long applause. The kind audiences give when they feel like they witnessed something real. Zendaya stood from her chair while the crowd continued clapping. Whoopi hugged her warmly. Sunny embraced her next. Sarah thanked her quietly. Even Joy stood up. For one brief moment, the two women looked at each other silently. No cameras cutting away. No music playing. Just silence. Then Joy finally spoke quietly enough that only nearby microphones caught it. "You made your point." Zendaya answered just as softly. "I wasn't trying to win one." That line instantly became the final viral moment of the day. Within hours, every major entertainment outlet covered the interview. Clips flooded TikTok. Reaction videos appeared across YouTube. Comment sections exploded into debate. Some viewers criticized Joy Behar for pushing too far. Others argued difficult conversations are necessary in celebrity interviews. But one thing nearly everyone agreed on was this. Zendaya walked into the view as a celebrity. She walked out as the emotional center of a global conversation. By nighttime, hashtags connected to the interview had surpassed hundreds of millions of views. Media analysts called it one of the most intense talk show moments of the year. Body language experts analyzed every expression. Psychologists discussed the emotional weight of fame and public exposure. Even other celebrities subtly referenced the interview online. And through all of it, one image continued spreading faster than anything else. Zendaya sitting calmly beneath bright studio lights, while an entire room slowly realized composure and weakness were not the same thing. The next morning, headlines covered every corner of the internet. Zendaya silences the view. Fans rally behind Zendaya after heated clash. Joy Behar faces backlash following explosive interview. But hidden beneath the drama and viral clips was something deeper people couldn't stop talking about. How many public figures had been forced to emotionally perform for audiences simply because the world demanded constant access to them. And for millions watching, that question stayed long after the interview ended. So now we want to hear from you. Was Joy Behar simply asking tough questions? Or did she push Zendaya too far live on television? Drop your opinion in the comments below, because this debate is far from over. And don't forget to subscribe to the Echo View for more explosive celebrity clashes, emotional confrontations, and dramatic stories that everyone will be talking about.